Welcome to my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? With my guests, we are discussing health issues with an emphasis on reproductive health, answering questions you may have and debunking some of the myths around our health. And today we are talking to my dear friend, Dr. Karin Hammarberg. Karin is a senior research fellow in the School of Public Health and Preventative Medicine in Monash University in Australia. She is a registered nurse and has worked for over 20 years coordinating IVF programs. Her PhD, which she completed in 2006, examined the experience of birth and mothering after assisted conception. Her main areas of research include fertility and preconception health promotion, psychological aspects of infertility and infertility treatment, health and development of children born as a result of assisted conception, infertility care in resource-constrained settings, and women's health in midlife. What a lot of wonderful topics. So today we are going to talk about many of these topics. Hello, Karin.
Hello, how are you, Joyce?
I'm very well. We might be having some technical hitches with this one. We're hoping everything's going to work out okay. So, can we start by you telling us about your amazing career and what led you to become a nurse and a researcher in the field of fertility?
Yeah, well, it is a very long career because in the early 80s, I graduated as a midwife in Gothenburg in Sweden. And I had previously done a degree in nursing, of course. I worked in delivery suite for some time. And then this was a time when the first IVF baby was born in Scandinavia. So I became kind of very interested in the whole area of assisted reproductive technology and was lucky enough to be recruited to be the first coordinator of this program. And this is now 40 years ago. I worked in Sweden in IVF clinics for about a decade, and then I moved to Australia and I kept working in IVF clinics for quite some time. And then there was this opportunity to actually move on from clinical work to research. And I found that really rewarding because with all that clinical experience, I had some idea of what the really important questions, research questions were in terms of the more psychosocial aspects of infertility and infertility care. So that's where I kind of got stuck into and have been working on ever since in a lot of different projects, but most of them relating to fertility, infertility, assisted conception, but much really focusing on the psychological and the social aspects of all this.
And over those years, I started working in 1987. So you've been working in the field longer than me. But over these years, we've seen so many changes around assisted conception. So what do you feel is the most important advance that we've had in our field? But also, what are some of the biggest problems or the biggest problem that we've encountered?
Well, I do think that obviously results have improved over the decades. It was quite random at the beginning, and pretty much no one really knew what they were doing. But over time, I think the greatest advances is that the systems of culturing embryos have improved. So there's many more and more viable embryos being created. The freezing of embryos was a huge, big advance because suddenly, you could choose to transfer one or possibly two embryos and freeze the others, which you couldn't do in the past. And also, we have finally made some headways in reducing the multiple birth rate, which I think is really, really important. In the 90s, of course, the discovery or the new technique of using the ICSI method for and injecting a sperm into an egg, that suddenly opened up opportunities for couples with male factor infertility who really previously didn't have many options apart from donor sperm. So they're probably the more technological advances, and I do think that we think it's an enormously helpful opportunity, and a lot of people have created many happy families from all of this. But we also need to remember that probably almost half of the people who try IVF actually don't end up with a baby. And my concern is that sometimes the care and the follow-up care of people who end treatment without the outcome that they'd hoped for is not it's not as good as it could be. And I do think there's work to be done in terms of the patient care side of IVF. And I know that people call it a roller coaster for good reasons. It's a very up and down journey, and it comes with a lot of challenges. It costs a lot of money, and people invest time and effort and really a lot of their emotions. And when it doesn't work, it is really very devastating. And I think we underestimate the importance of good patient-centered care, and that's one of the things I think clinics could improve on.
Yes, I think IVF is talked about so much now. It's even taught in schools, and I think my view is that the media leads us to think that going through IVF is easy. It's an easy option, and it's going to be very successful. So we'll talk about our work that we've been doing together, but the fertility education poster that we made together, when we've just done some focus groups with young people, they were 18 to 25. And one of the biggest things they didn't realize was that IVF wasn't more successful. So in the poster, we put the success rates of IVF at different ages, and they thought from the media that it was a lot more successful. So that was one of the things. So how successful really is IVF now in 2023?
Well, I think you can say as a general rule that the probably about half of the people who try IVF will not have a baby. But of course, it's so age dependent. So for younger women, I think, you could expect if you had up to 3 cycles, but maybe 70 or percent of younger women under 35 will probably have a baby. But if you go into the 40s, the chance of a baby, even after 3 full cycles, is probably more like 10%. So it is so dependent on the woman's age. That is probably the most important determinant of chance. And then, of course, at least in Australia, about a quarter of the women who start IVF treatment are over 40. So we have a huge proportion of women who really go into this with a very, very small chance of coming out with a baby.
Yeah, and the other real point that lots of people don't realize is how expensive it is. It's got really expensive, and I know that you have some health provision in Australia. So in the UK, I know you're aware we have this postcode lottery. So there's some people that live in an area where it won't get funded at all. So how's the situation in Australia with funding?
I think from that point of view, we are more equitable here because there is actually no limit on the number of cycles any woman can have in terms of, the IVF treatment. But it is subsidized to a point, but it's not completely paid for. So about half of the cost is covered by the government, but it still leaves people with quite a huge cost to pay themselves.
So is that limiting to some couples? Are there some couples that really can't afford to even have one cycle in Australia?
Absolutely. We can't convert it to pounds, but it would cost around about $5,000, and that would be potentially something like at least £2,000 for one cycle. And that's well beyond the means of a lot of people. They have just recently in Victoria, where I live, they have opened up a public IVF clinic, meaning that there is no cost to the patients. So a few people might benefit from that. But generally speaking, maybe people can have one cycle, but they may not be able to have the cycle number 2 or 3 that they might need to actually have a reasonable chance.
Yeah. And then we've got our friends in countries like Belgium where they fund 6 cycles. I think we're doing an injustice to those people who can't afford it and who can't even have one cycle to try. I find that really heartbreaking.
Mm.
So let's talk about some of the new technology. You've mentioned some of them, such as ICSI and embryo freezing, and it's been great that the multiple birth rate has gone down globally. But we've also got these lots of new technology. Everyone loves to make new technology, and I think it's growing exponentially at the moment. I've been going to a lot of health tech events and femtech events, looking at new technology for women's health and for general health. And in IVF, we've had this for a long, long time. We've had a lot of new technology that's come in to the IVF arena. And you and I have both been doing some work on this. And obviously, we want new technology that's going to help the patients. But could you tell us a little bit more about these IVF add-ons and what the situation is like in Australia?
Well, I think the last 2 decades at least has seen a proliferation of different, what we call add-ons, which are things that are added to an ordinary, normal IVF protocol. And they can be medications, they can be laboratory procedures, or they can be a range of different things. And they are obviously it's important that we innovate, but also very important that we know whether what we offer makes a difference to the chance of having a baby. People come to have a baby, and I think whatever we offer should have some evidence to underpin its use, so that especially when people pay for it. And what's happened, I think, is in this very commercial environment of fertility services. There's great competition, and clinics want to stand out, and they want to offer things that perhaps another clinic doesn't offer. And it's often launched as a new to improve chance, but without real evidence to actually underpin the claims of benefits. So we've done quite a lot of work on looking at how these add-ons are portrayed on IVF clinic websites, and really the information is very incomplete. It's not transparent, and it doesn't actually help people make good and informed decisions about whether to use add-ons. So we also know that about 80% of women in Australia, at least who have IVF, have used one or more add-on, and most of them have paid something for it. So the bottom line is that a lot of people use a lot of things that don't have a good evidence for benefits. And not only that, we actually don't even know if they might be damaging, they might be harmful. So we are calling for much more, what they call randomized controlled trials, to actually establish whether something that is offered is beneficial. And clinics find that a bit difficult because it costs a lot of money to do these trials. And also they often say that patients really want something new offered, and therefore it's a justification for at least trying. And we debate this constantly, and you'll be part of that debate as well. And I think we need to continue to scrutinize what's offered, and try and help people understand, that they have a choice, and that because something is new doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. And to help patients be quite a bit more discerning and ask more questions, and try to be selective about what they pay for.
Yes, I love that, Karin. You've said exactly what I would say. And we've done similar work to you, looking at UK clinic websites, and the HFEA have looked at the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, who govern IVF in the UK. The HFEA have looked at the number of patients that use these technologies, and we have a very similar issue in the UK as you do in Australia. And people, the public, they just clutch at things. They do feel that the new technology is the way, and we are trying to help them understand evidence-based medicine, but it's hard. And then there are many people, as you say, doing these clinical trials are expensive, and there's many people that will argue that, well, it's too expensive. But then we have procedures which are done now routinely and are costing patients thousands of pounds, thousands of dollars, and there's no evidence that they work at all. Some of them have been around for decades, and I feel it very heartbreaking. And when I go to these tech events, and these are tech which are not to do with IVF at all, and I see the same stories coming, new technology sounds great. And I just get fed up with asking the startup people, you've made some very bold claims. Have you got any evidence? And, they always say no. So, I just feel like almost a broken record that 20 years after, bringing this up in the IVF arena, we're now bringing up in the broader health tech. And I know you've got some views on that. We'll come back to some of those, health tech things in a moment. But I just wanted to do a little bit more about the fertility side. So what about egg freezing? So this is one of the new technologies that's relatively new as far as your and I career goes. It's only been about 15 years or so that it's really become a viable technique. So we've talked a lot in the past, and you mentioned about how it's harder for a woman who's older to get pregnant. We call it female fertility decline. Is egg freezing the answer? Can women freeze their eggs? And what do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely technically possible, and I think it is, as you say, it's a very, it's gaining momentum, and a lot of celebrities promote it, and it's somehow launched as a solution to all your problems about when to have a baby. And I'm sure it has its place, but I do think that again, it's really how it's explained, and people understanding what it actually means. Because if you freeze eggs when you're very young, those eggs are in very good quality, and the chance of them resulting in a baby when you're older is quite good. But again, if you freeze when you're very young, you're very unlikely to ever use those eggs. So they might be costing you a lot of money in storage for a long period of time, and in the end, you're not going to use them. If you freeze eggs when you're older, those eggs are probably not as good a quality, and the chance of them resulting in a baby is much lower. And so it's a numbers game. If you're younger, you need fewer eggs for a reasonable chance. If you're older, you need many, many more eggs, but you're also less likely to get a lot of eggs. So people need to get their heads around the numbers here, and primarily realize that whatever you freeze, there's never a guarantee of a baby. So, to have it as a plan for your childbearing, if you really want children, is a bit risky. And I think it's a gamble, and you might get lucky, but again, it's also possible that you do all this, but at the end there's no baby. So if people have all the facts and the figures, and they understand the numbers, that perhaps you need to do 3 or 4 attempts before you get a number of eggs that's going to give you a reasonable chance, and that will cost you 3-4 times the amount that is advertised on websites. Because again, websites tell you can freeze your eggs and it costs you this much, but it doesn't tell you that you might have to do the procedure 3 or 4 times, which means the cost is much, much higher. So it's very costly. It doesn't come with a guarantee, and potentially, people might get disappointed in the end. But again, there are a lot of women who feel that this gives them an opportunity, that buys them a bit of time. They haven't found the right partner. They're desperate to have children sometime, and they feel that they do something proactively to give themselves a greater opportunity to actually have a child in the future. So I completely understand that.
Have you got the same as we have in the UK? We've had very few women come back to use these eggs.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at people who froze more recently, maybe they haven't had time yet, but even looking at people who froze quite some time ago, it is a very small proportion of people who use their eggs, because either they conceive without using them, or they don't find a partner and they don't want to, have a child on their own. So there are the 2 main reasons why eggs remain in storage. And then, of course, that comes the time when you have to make a decision about what to do with those eggs. And that can be quite difficult for some people.
Yeah, for sure. And I talk about egg freezing. I say exactly what you say. And I say that I feel uncomfortable if it was plan A, that A woman felt, okay, I'm going to get my degree, I'm going to start my career, I'm going to freeze my eggs when I'm 25, I'm going to carry on with my career, find a partner, have my baby at 38. I think that, well, that makes me feel uncomfortable. I know some women are going to do that. I talk about egg freezing as a great plan B, an option that you may need to go to. For example, I was single at 32. My partner wasn't ready. If egg freezing had been around, I definitely would have frozen my eggs. I wouldn't have frozen them at 28, but when I realized that he wasn't ready, I would have frozen them, and it would have bought us some more time. So I think the plan B works well. I think the plan A, as you said, for the reasons you said, I think that's tricky. And you and I are trying to help educate people to keep them out of the IVF unit. And with egg freezing, we're getting younger, fertile people into the IVF unit. So it's sort of, certainly for me, it feels uncomfortable. And what do you think about the future fertility treatment? Is there any technique that is bubbling under that you think might come in soon, that might change the way we look at fertility treatment?
I always think that the best fertility treatment is the fertility treatment you don't need to have. So I think we're really working hard, both you and I, on helping people avoid infertility treatment. But if you do need it, it is fantastic that it exists. And I don't see any new technology really making a huge difference anyway. I think we've come to the point where success rates are as good as they're going to be, because we're dealing with biology. Biology is never going to be, forever getting better and better and better. There is a limit to it, as there is with natural conception. But what I can see happening is that more and more people from different walks of life are using this technology. And that includes, of course, same-sex couples, both male and female, women who go it alone and become solo mothers. So the remit of the services that are provided is really increasing, and more people are making use of this technology. In Australia at the moment, about 5% of children who are born from one form of assisted reproductive technology or another. And I know it's even higher in some other countries, in Scandinavia, for instance. So it's definitely something that's here to stay. And I actually don't think that the chance of success is going to increase much. But again, the streamlining, it's becoming easier. A lot of home monitoring is coming in, and that's making it a bit more easier to kind of combine with other things in life, because it's not quite as labor intensive for the patient. So there are probably some of those kind of more technological aspects of the care element that might be improving.
Yeah, again, I totally agree with you. I see all these new IVF units being made, and they're all shiny and white and silver, and they look so high tech. But I'm really not convinced they're going to give you better success rates than those that have been around for decades. But let's move on now. So you had a paper out recently in the conversation about fertility testing, and we both know that if we had a way of testing a man and a woman's fertility, because it's always two people, and I think some of these tests, they're marketed that it's just your problem on your fertility, but obviously it's the fertility of your partner that's important. But they have these fertility tests, a lot of these home tests that you can do. And how do you think they could reliably predict the chances of whether someone's fertile or not? And please tell us more about them.
Well, the short answer is that they can't, because what I think the test you're referring to is this anti-Mullerian hormone test, and that's become used increasingly out of context. The test is useful in the IVF clinic when a doctor wants to know how much fertility drugs to give a woman, because it tells you something about what you can expect in terms of numbers of eggs. But it really doesn't have the capacity to tell you about your current fertility or your future fertility. And when people call it an egg timer test and all sorts of other things, it's really quite a misnomer, because there is no way that this test, they can tell you something about what they call the ovarian reserve, how many eggs are in the ovaries, but they can't tell you anything about the quality. And they definitely can't tell you anything about how long that reserve is going to last. So we know that a low AMH at a certain age and a high AMH at the same age really gives that there's no correlation between that and the chance of a woman having a baby. But these tests are now sold direct to consumers. People can order them online. And again, we looked at websites and what they say about these tests, and it is promoting it as something you can check your fertility, tell you if you've got lots of time left or if you need to freeze your eggs now, when in fact the test can't give you any of that information. So I think people are getting sold a bit of a porky, and they could save their money, I think.
So in the UK, as well as having them at home, the supermarkets, chemists are selling them. I think the supermarkets are selling them as well, actually, but the chemists are certainly selling them. So you can go in and buy a test. But for many years, the fertility clinics again have promoted them. And if you go in the UK, certainly if you go to the fertility clinic websites, you can go and have your fertility test. I think most fertility clinics do a bit more. They also do a scan, and they may have a consultation with a doctor and give you a bit more information. So would that give you any more information if you went to a fertility clinic and had, in England, they like calling them a fertility MOT, which is MOT is what you have for your car to check that it's working well. So they're very much marketed that, they're going to give you a almost fertility health check. Would it be beneficial to go to a fertility clinic and have scans and blood tests and any other bits and bobs done?
Well, I guess the more kind of pieces of information you have, the more reliable perhaps that information is. But there's a very simple rule here, and the biggest determinant of whether you have will be able to have a baby now or in the future is just your age. And there is variation, of course, genetic variations. Some women enter menopause earlier than others. And fertility usually, we estimate, is not functioning anymore about 10 years before menopause. So it's not like you have, opportunities until you stop menstruating, because fertility, in most cases, at least probably 5 to 10 years before menopause, the chance of conception is non-existent. So you can have all the testing you like, but I think a rule of thumb is that before 35, everything is pretty, intact. After 35, between 35 and 40, there is a slight decline in fertility, and after 40, it gets really hard. And I don't think you need a lot of testing to this is just a biological fact.
Karen, can I bring up? You mentioned the 10 years before menopause, and that was a figure that I've written in my book, and what I had always read. I think we need to go back and have another look. I've interviewed so many women recently, postmenopausal women, and they've told me about their pregnancies, and quite a few of them have had a baby, and then literally 1 or 2 or 3 years later, they've entered the perimenopause, and some of them quite quickly have stopped their periods. So I'm really starting to question this 10 years, because so many women have told me they totally stopped their periods within a few years after having children. What do you think about that? Do you think we need to go back and have a look at that data?
No, I don't, because this is population data and it's been collected in lots of different populations. Pregnancies do happen, but it is just like the probability of it is just, I think all the data that I've seen, at least, they say between 5 and 10 years. So it varies between women, I'm sure, but at a population level, if you look at every woman and everyone has tried a pregnancy in those years, I think the data is pretty solid. And of course there are exceptions. So I wouldn't kind of give people that the impression that somehow evolutionary we have changed, because if you look at data from populations where there is no contraception, it's very clear. You know, the time between the last pregnancy, and these are obviously historical populations, but that's the only way you can look at it, because once you introduce contraception, it's very difficult to estimate these things. And yeah, I still think it stands, and whether it's 6 or 8 or 4 years, it doesn't really matter, because the main point is that you're not fertile until you stop menstruating, and pregnancies in the 40s are difficult to achieve.
Yeah, that's very important advice, and I haven't changed my advice. I obviously still let everyone know that. So let's talk about reproductive health education. So I think it was about 4 years ago, you and I were at a conference, a wonderful conference in Copenhagen, and I've been writing my book on reproductive health education, and we'd set up a UK education group back in 2015. And I was really aware of the amazing work that was happening globally. I think in the UK we were quite far behind. There was a few people like Jackie Boven who had been doing research on education, but there were amazing studies that had been going on for many years, such as in Portugal and Denmark, and your amazing work in Australia. So you and I sat in a bar, and I love getting people together who are much more expert than me and hope their knowledge rubs off on me. So we that was the first start of setting up an international group, which we originally called the Fertility Education Initiative, but we wanted to be not just talk about having babies. That's really not our message. Our message is really the whole of reproductive health. So we've changed our name now to the long title, but it does what it says on the tin, the International Reproductive Health Education Collaboration, which we call IREC for short. But you in Australia really have led the way in this. You have been doing fabulous work for many, many years. Please tell us about how this started and the work you've been doing in Australia.
Well, we were lucky enough, probably 12 years ago now, we applied for and got a government grant to introduce a fertility health education program. And this was in response to one of the obligations of an organization I work for, which is a statutory authority in Victoria, which is called the Victorian Assisted Reproductive Treatment Authority. One of our obligations under the law is to actually, help people understand how they can prevent infertility. So on that basis, we thought if the more knowledge and understanding people have, potentially can help them make good decisions about the timing of pregnancy, and also prepare well for pregnancy, because the more we know about the importance of preconception health and how optimizing health and taking folate and all of those things really makes a big difference to the future health, the health of the future child. If people had those kind of concepts clearer in their mind, that it might help optimize the reproductive aspirations that people have, that they might have a better chance of having the number of children they want to have, and to having healthy children. So it is a fertility health promotion program. So we try and share information about what you can do to give yourself the best chance of having a baby. And uniquely, I think we have made it a very conscious decision to target men as much as women, because traditionally everything fertility is pinned on women. They need to do this and that and the other, and they're scrutinized in lots of ways. And we really wanted to drag the men into the conversation and make them equally responsible for the reproductive outcomes, because research shows that men want to have children just as much as women do. So they need to be stepping up, and they need to take that responsibility seriously. And you can't say forever, that you're not ready and you want to wait and you want to have a baby later, because that's how people miss out, because age is still the most important determinant of whether you will have the number of children you plan to have or wanted to have.
It's great that men are coming into the conversation. We've got a new program in the UK, a documentary following 3 celebrities that have their sperm count done, and then they talk about the lifestyle changes they can make to try and improve it. And I think when you and I started, we really had forgotten about the men. We were sort of blaming everything on the women and weren't really engaging the men. And I think that's a great change. And we've now got research about men's fertility declining as well, and there are other specific issues about men's fertility, and we've included that on the poster. So, if there was just a couple of key points you think men and women should know, what would you say to them?
I think, we can't escape the biological fact that the woman's age is still going to be the biggest determinant of whether a pregnancy will happen. But we should also acknowledge that the health of both partners at the time and before conception really has huge and impactful implications for the health of the baby. So I think empowering people with knowledge and explaining these things in a way that's easy to understand, but also that's not punitive, and that people, you don't want to make people feel bad. And we have written about this, you and I, that language is so important in health promotion, because you can actually put people off, and they can start to feel like you're just dictating and finger pointing and so forth. So I think it's very delicate kind of balance to walk, where facts are facts, and but you need to actually contextualize them and make sure that people understand that it's not, they haven't done anything wrong, and you don't want to make people feel guilty or ashamed or any of those things. So really trying to be very positive, and instead of saying, smoking, is bad for you, you can say, if you stop smoking, these are all the benefits you can expect. So you need to turn the messages around so that they're more palatable, and that people can think about, yeah, these things might actually be helpful. But you also need to have strategies for how you can achieve those things. I think the problem with weight is one of those examples, because to just say that you need to be in the normal weight range is actually not very helpful. And the more we read, the more we understand that weight loss doesn't actually help very much. So we need to focus much more on a healthy diet than on weight loss. And I think the conversations around weight are starting to shift, and we're thinking more about it as a not an individual's problem, but something that's influenced by so many environmental factors, and that we should not focus on the individual in terms of the obesity rate. So it's a very fine line conversations to have, and I think the way you frame your messages really has a big impact on whether your message is going to be heard and people will take action in response to that knowledge.
So, with regards to female fertility, I keep seeing adverts and posters again for supplements and potions and lotions and all sorts of things that will rejuvenate women's eggs. So, we healthy diet's obviously important, but is there anything a woman could do to turn back her fertility clock and make her egg more youthful and fertilizable?
Not to my knowledge, but I hear the spin, and I've heard it coming. And the most recent kind of add-on is this ovarian rejuvenation. I mean, I just want to cry when I even heard the name, because I think it's delusional. Obviously, I think women who want a pregnancy, however they want it, they should be on folate, because folate and iodine are absolutely essential, and they make a big difference to the risk of a birth defect. So for all intents and purposes, any woman in reproductive age who is not taking using contraception, is wise to be on folate, because that will avoid most of the spina bifida that otherwise would occur. But apart from that, a healthy diet and regular exercise, and trying to be moderate in terms of alcohol, and absolutely not smoking. They're probably the most important things you can do.
Excellent advice. Now, Karen, we've never talked about the menopause, but I'd really love to hear your view about the perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. In the UK, we have quite a negative narrative that this is all doom and gloom and a terrible time and something that women have to go through, and they're going to be like this forever. And there's only one answer, and that's to take HRT. I just wondered what you thought about all of this.
Well, having gone through the whole phase of perimenopause and postmenopause and the whole rest of it, I have to think that I have to say that I think that all those doom and gloom messages are a bit overstated. There's a period of time when the body feels a little bit different, because it's adjusting to all those new hormone levels, and hot flushes are unpleasant. But generally speaking, I think the whole thing is quite manageable, and I would much rather focus on the positive. That there's a lot of good things that come out of the postmenopausal life, and I really think that the narrative around that you women they get that fuzzy thinking, and it sometimes it sounds like, would you ever hire a woman who's postmenopausal and if they've got all those problems? But in fact, I think women can be super productive, and there's a lot of things we don't have to worry about postmenopause. So I think professionally we can often do more and engage more, because some of the other responsibilities we have eased off. So I would much rather see, and I'm trying hard myself to emphasize all the good things that happen after menopause. I also think, of course, that for those who do suffer really severe symptoms, and some women do, it's very important that they feel that there is some help, and they should try the different combinations of hormonal therapy to try and reduce those symptoms. But for most women, I think it's a phase when we, a phase of change, and some of it is a bit unpleasant. But generally speaking, I think life is looking up post-menopause.
Again, I always agree with you, Karen. I totally agree. I call it a time of liberation and freedom. It's just, for me personally, it's been a wonderful time being postmenopause. And I think I'm doing my best research work. I'm doing my best social life. So, yeah, I think we've got to think of the positives. And I agree. If we create this terrible image of all the symptoms and problems a woman will have while she's going through the perimenopause, who's going to employ such a woman? Are they going to start asking, are you still having periods, before they employ you, which they couldn't do? But I think we've got to be careful. And in the UK, we sort of gone overboard now. We weren't talking about menopause at all 5 years ago. We're talking about it all the time now, but we've got to come down a little bit and put it in perspective. I think we've overshot the discussions. So I've called my podcast "Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This?" because so many times in my career I've heard people say that, and certainly our work on reproductive health education has stemmed from this. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned already that you've heard people say, "Why didn't anyone tell me this?"
Well, the biggest one, unfortunately, is this. A woman 38 wants IVF, it doesn't work, and you then start to explain the biology of aging in women, and that's when you often hear, "I wish I'd known that," and I feel that even though it's not a very kind of sexy message to have to try and sell, that your fertility is declining, and certainly into your 40s, it does get difficult. People don't actually want to hear that. But I also think if you don't engage with the biological reality, it is an uphill battle, and people get disappointed. And again, I think the other thing is that, as we talked about before, considering IVF a backup plan, if you wait and you plan to have children later in life, and you think, if it doesn't work, I'll have IVF. Well, unfortunately, IVF is not very helpful. So it's not a good plan B, and I think that's something that people wish they'd been told as well. So
Yeah, and
they're probably the main things.
the research we've been doing with the poster with the young people, they really appreciated having the information because they felt it was really important. But we did discuss with them, could you imagine if you were older? And they said, yeah, that would definitely be difficult to take, because you'd want to have known that. So yeah, the 38-year-old woman who's only just really getting to grips with her fertility decline, it's a hard message to take. So important to get this message with young people, so it's really ingrained in them, and then they can make their own decision about how they want to live their life, but they've got the information. So what motivates you, Karin? You've had such an amazing career. You've done so much brilliant work. What motivates you to do this?
The more I have got into this idea of health promotion and associated with linking that to people's reproductive goals and aspirations, I find that quite rewarding, and people are generally grateful to receive information. And I think if you can make it really user friendly, and be a bit imaginative about how you present information, because I think we have so much technology now. So there's many more fun ways of actually conveying information, and there's interactive tools. There's all sorts of things you can do. So being kind of creative about how you engage with the public in terms of these kind of messages that sometimes aren't really what people want to hear, but trying to penetrate all that and to still enlighten people about the reality of fertility. I find that really rewarding, and I enjoy this idea that you communicate complex concepts in a way that people can understand. That's I really enjoy that.
Fabulous. So that leads nicely on to my last few questions, which I'm asking all my guests. What makes you happy, and where is your happy place?
Oh, my happy place. I've got lots of happy places. Happy professionally, I think, is when you feel that it's really, you come up with something useful, and people respond well to it. We did a series of very short, like 1 minute videos with a comedian a little while ago, a guy, and he was funny, of course, but he was also up for the challenge of trying to convey messages about sperm health to men. And we had a campaign that really was directed to men. And he was super funny. And there were just 5 very short videos, but they were hugely successful. And somehow we managed to kind of hit that sweet spot between humor and without exaggerating, but actually conveying very serious messages in a humorous way. And I feel for men, often that is quite a helpful way of communicating information. So, if you hit some kind of little gold nugget in communication, I find that very rewarding. So that's a happy place for me.
And is there anything else that makes you happy? So some people have said, sitting on this sofa. For me, it's being on a beach. Anything away from your work life that makes you happy?
Oh, lots of things. I really enjoy all the interaction with we've got grandchildren, which is lovely. But even I'm sitting in wintry Australia. Imagining a beach would be absolutely wonderful. I love to sit on a beach and enjoying the sunshine and holidaying in exotic places. There's so much I enjoy.
Yeah, you do a lot of traveling, which I'm envious of.
I do.
And the very last question, what advice would you give your younger self? Could be anything, could be about work, could be about your private life, anything.
Well, I think generally speaking is if there is an opportunity to try something, jump in. I think I never want to think back and think that why didn't I try that job, or why didn't I take that opportunity. You might jump in and find that it's not the right thing, but at least you'd know. And I really want to if there is opportunities of challenges presenting, I'd like to jump on them. And I think I would advise my younger self to do it. Mostly I have. Occasionally I've kind of decided not to. And I think any young person who has opportunities should just go for it. And if it fails, it's a learning. And if it's successful, it's wonderful.
I love that. I love that. You've got nothing to lose. So
No.
thank you, Karin. Thank you, Karin, so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you, as always. A shame we're on opposite ends of the world, but we're going to be together soon in Lyon, and I'm looking forward to having another glass of wine with you and seeing what other wonderful things we can come up with. Thank you very much, Karin.
Thank you for having me.